Welcome back to Chris in Retro. This is the show where we take a look at high-risk living. And in this episode, we're going to look at people who think they're being pretty slick. And there are times when that doesn't work out so well. And I think oftentimes I can speak to my own life when I thought I had it all together, that I was at most risk. When I wasn't seeing the unintended consequences, and they did catch up with me, and they do catch up with you over time. The other side of that is the fact that there's hope and there's options when things do fall apart. You know, you do have choices. And what we're trying to do is share those through a retrospective look at my journey and those of my guests to see how to find hope and find options to move beyond those bad decisions or beyond those days that just didn't work out. You know, a lot of times we'll, on this show and with people that I talk to, it's amazing to me as I look at my own journey and look at others, how we refuse to see the risk oftentimes. It's not that we don't see it. Sometimes we just intentionally avoid that whole thought of possibly ever having a bad situation because it couldn't be me. You know, we've also spoken about fear and how fear can be an inhibitor to high performance. High performance, you know, fear can give us a veil of things that aren't real. It can deter us. And sometimes we have to move through that veil boldly. But fear does have a purpose. And sometimes fear can give us at least a diagnostic of what could go wrong. And I think at times it's important for us to recognize that, especially when we're young. My guest today spent 18 years in a federal prison. He's now free. He's a father. He's a husband, author, host of a wildly successful YouTube channel called Blood and a Razor Wire TV, where they have 126,000 subscribers. At the core of his mission is a business called Freedom Fighters, where he advocates for those who are currently incarcerated to help them find better days. My guest is trying to find a way to get us a preventative measure, and in his show, a lot of times trying to scare people straight. Welcome to the show, Chad Marks.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to come down to our channel. You got a lot going on over there, so thanks for being here.
No problem.
Chad's local to us as well, which is really drew me to. I'm like, when I first saw your show, I was like, that's 585. I know that place. But also, the first time I came across it, I'll go through YouTube. I've joked before about how I get stuck in the rut on YouTube, and I just kind of get caught in the vortex of craziness. Well, I came across your show one time, and you were having a conversation with a young woman on there that's on the street. She was struggling. And you and I talked yesterday about how we've seen other channels it feels like exploitation. You know, they take girls that are attractive young women. There's never a guy on their show, ever. And so yours had this young female on there, and your approach really struck me because you basically just said, I can find you help. Do you want help? It wasn't, hey, I got a place for you. It was, I can find you help. Do you want it? I'm really worried about you. And that stuck with me. And so I subscribed, and I've been a fan since. So I guess with all that and with all you got going on, what inspired this? What inspired your purpose?
Well, I was originally sentenced to 40 years in federal prison for a I like to say nonviolent drug crime, but really I think anytime you're involved in drug dealing, it probably is violent in some respects or can become violent. And, you know, I was part of the problem in that community. I was probably one of the biggest drug dealers in that area.
Okay.
There were plenty of women that were addicted, that were out there doing things that they probably shouldn't be doing to feed their addiction. And eventually I go to federal prison. I'm sentenced to 40 years at the age of 24. And I end up getting out on the First Step Act after Trump passed all that stuff. The judge looked at my rehabilitation, all of that, and he decided that he should reduce my sentence. And he reduced it by 20 years. So I pretty much spent 17 years, 5 months, and 21 days in federal prison. And when I left, I said, I'm going to become the voice of the voiceless. And I ended up putting the YouTube channel together. And then I started saying, you know what? I would like to go back out in the community that I helped pollute and try to help some of these people. My father was a drug addict, died getting high. And, you know, being out there on Lyle Avenue and Sherman Street and Dewey Avenue, I was able to kind of talk to some people. I kind of felt like I was making pretty good money. I still do with Freedom Fighters. So I said, you know what? I want to try to give back, try to help some of these people that I helped destroy, either directly or indirectly. And I think, I'm not sure if it's the interview that you're talking about, is I ended up interviewing this girl that I knew her parents. And when I went to jail, she was probably 10 years old. Wow. And then I end up seeing her on Lyle Avenue. I don't know if that's the interview you're talking about because I've done a few.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, like, I know you. And she's like, yeah, you're Chad. I was just 10.
I do think that's the one because you guys seem to have some history.
Yeah, and then eventually, she ends up telling me that, she's HIV positive. And this was a girl that was 10 years old when I went to jail.
Wow.
And I'm like, look, if you really want some help, then we're here to help you. And, when I don't always do it on camera, but I don't do it for, like, hey, look what Chad did. Like,
No.
Even if they don't want help, almost every single person that I interviewed, I bought them some food. I've offered to take them to rehab. I've offered to help them out with clothing. And sadly, Chris, a lot of them don't take it.
Right. They don't take it initially, or they don't, it's not sustainable.
They don't even take it initially. They're like, well, you know what? They're not ready. They feel like they're not ready.
Right.
And we live in an area where it's extremely violent. A lot of people don't know. I think we have the second highest poverty rate. Mm-hmm. Syracuse is number one. The violence is off the chain, off the hook, especially in that neighborhood. And I'm just thinking, like, why can't they walk away? And if you don't understand addiction, then you can't understand why they won't leave, why they won't walk away.
Right.
And I think I told you this too, like when we talked on the phone, I sometimes go back to that neighborhood because I feel like it's drawing me there. Not to do anything illegal, not to sell drugs, but I feel like I have to go there to remind myself that, I got a 40-year sentence from this neighborhood.
Right.
Not because of the neighborhood, but because of the actions that I took. I made my own choices. So, me going back out there trying to help people, I think it helps me.
What I find interesting about the fact that does help you is, one of the things I preach all the time to people that are in recovery, I'm in recovery, and people that come and talk to me about their stories is I tell them to burn the bridge. And we also tell people not to make monuments out of certain things. But it sounds like for you, that monument is almost helpful for your, not recovery from addiction, but recovery from the life that you had once lived.
Yeah, I mean, I see it that way as well. And I think that, back to the original question is, what motivates me is I do like to help people because I feel like I took,
Yeah.
I was the reason why kids didn't have a Christmas because I provided an outlet for their parents to come buy drugs. I've seen plenty of people bringing Christmas presents or selling their food stamps. People are struggling. People are, and these are it's the kids, right? Mm-hmm. I always go back to the kids. I care about kids, man. Like they're innocent. Mm-hmm. And, I've done so many bad things in my life as far as selling drugs and helping contribute to them kids not having parents, not having a dad, directly or indirectly. Mm-hmm. Their father might have been killed out there. Their father might have went to prison for stealing or, even selling drugs. So if I have an opportunity to give back, I try to do that. And that's what the motivation really is.
Right. I cautiously, as we first started talking about this, I was cautious about having you as a guest because I don't know. Like I've been around a lot of people like you have too, that have one mask on. And then they're a completely different person somewhere else. And I feel in our conversations off the air that you're an authentic person. And I think that I get a sense of why it is that you're giving the way you are. And I think it's real. That's just for my audience and for those that watch this, I really believe that you're an authentic person. I guess one of the questions I have is going back into that environment, though, where you're going back through and you're reminding yourself and perhaps reaching out and helping somebody, how acceptant are they of you? Because you were not really as I understand your history, and I didn't know you then, you were in a low-level guy. I mean, you had some stuff going on that was pretty significant and you were known. How are you accepted going back there?
It's a different environment, right? When I came back from prison after 18 years, I go back to this neighborhood because my mother had lived there for 40 years.
Right.
And I go back, and for me, it looked like a third world country.
Okay.
So the new people that are there, they don't really know me. So sometimes I'll show them some of the YouTube cards and say, look, this was, kind of my neighborhood. I was the guy over here that, helped destroy it, did a lot of bad things. And not to glamorize, but, back then I probably had the best product. I mean, that's what people would say. Like I said, my father was a drug addict. My father was a pretty well-known, people used to call him Geek and Chuck. I mean, it's horrible, but that's what they would call my dad. Mm-hmm. So now when I go back into the community and I talk to the people, at first they're like, yeah, right, whatever. But when you show them the card and you're like, yeah, I got sentenced to 40 years. Mm-hmm. They're more receptive now. Like, oh, you used to be in the street. Sometimes I might pull up and I've had people think I'm a cop. Yeah. And I'm just like, wow.
I get the cop comment all the time just because the way my hair is.
Yeah. So, they're not receptive right away. Mm-hmm. But when you start offering to help and, food, they are hungry. Some of the people out there are hungry.
Right.
I interviewed 2 girls out there that had a pimp out there. Mm-hmm. And he was watching them from a car and they're like, look, we really want to try to get away from this cat. He's been beating us up. He's been doing this. And one of the girls I also knew her, Irene, the Russian girl. Mm-hmm. I knew her when she was younger before, she was involved in drugs. And she's actually from the area that I live in now. She actually texted me the other day, like, hey, I need help.
Right. Actually, we were talking when you got the text.
So she's like, yeah, I need help. And then you go like, well, where are you? You know, are you willing to go this time? Well, I'll call you back. So, you know, sometimes it's in the moment.
Yeah.
So are people receptive? Yeah, to a certain extent they are, but not right away. Not right away.
They had to have been so, I'm reading into your story a little bit here, so forgive me, but I'm sitting here going, if I was in your shoes, I'm away 20 years and I come back to the neighborhood and see how bad it's fallen apart. Was there anything in you that said I partly caused this?
Well, you know,
that's how I think.
You know, I'm from an area in Rochester called Ghost Town, right? In name and right. So over there, you know, Broad Street, J Street, Smith Street, it's always been bad over there, right? But do I ever sit back and say, hey, I helped cause this? I say, you know, I was part of the problem and never part of the solution, right?
Gotcha.
So when I do go back there, it's not that I didn't create this. I mean, when I was a kid, like I said, my father was a drug addict.
Sure.
All the people in my neighborhood were drug addicts.
Yeah.
You might not know that when you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, but eventually you start to be like, oh, yeah, my dad's stealing the PlayStation. Oh, the TV's gone.
Yeah.
And then my friends would make fun of me. And, you know, like I said, they called my dad Geek and Chuck. And their friends were like, oh, man, your dad's a crackhead. You know what I mean? And then I would respond, oh, yeah, well, your mom's a hooker. Yeah. I mean, and this is the reality of what our life was when we were, in 5th grade, 4th grade? This is how we would talk to each other. So did I create the problem? No. Was I part of the problem? 100%. Has the problem progressed to a point where it's out of control? Yeah, I think it has. And, you know, I don't know if I told you this, but the other day I ended up going to a restaurant with my wife, and they're having this retirement party for a cop.
Okay.
And this lady's staring at me when I walk in. I don't know it's a retirement party for a cop. I'm just going there to eat, Tony D's. And she's staring at me, and I'm like, she says my name, Chad Marks. And I'm like, I know your face. She says, yeah, Terry Deercop. She was the lead investigator in my case. And I end up talking to her for like 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And at the end of the conversation, she pretty much tells me, look, you know, you deserve to go to prison, but I don't think you deserve to get 40 years. And, you know, I'm sorry. And she gave me a hug, right? Like,
wow.
I mean, this is really like, you know, this is the transition of, you know, forgiving and understanding that I created my own problem.
On that spot, you just said so much, okay? And it's so much to my audience. It's so much to those in recovery. It's so much to living these high-risk lives. You said, I created my own problem, but you're also overwhelmed by the response you're getting positively back. It shows, there is an option to recover. Even with 20 years, even with a lifelong exposure to this whole thing, there is options to have a better day. Same thing, it starts with ownership. You know, there's a role that you played. Yes, you were wrongly sentenced, but you put yourself in those situations with choices you made. You know, I'm wondering what your thoughts about that. Is that a consistent theme for you, or is that just something that just kind of, you know?
No, I mean, 100%. Let me just give you another example in your viewers. I ended up running into the guy that wore a wire on me in my case, right?
Oh,
I mean, I probably wasn't out 6 months, 7 months. And he sees me and he's like, oh, man, Chad, man, do you know who I am? I'm sorry. Of course I know who he is. This is the kid I looked up to in my community when I was a kid. He was in the band. He always had nice bikes. And eventually he becomes addicted to crack cocaine, right? And I take him off the street, give him a place to live, and he robs me, and then he goes to the cops, and he's like, hey, look, you know, I can get this guy for you. And he wears a wire on me through that cop that I just talked about, Terry. So I run into him, and my first, you know, run-in with him was about 7 months after jail. And he starts saying, man, please don't hurt me. I said, hey, man, that's the same thing you told me on the tape. Don't even talk to me. Like, man, just get away from me. And it took everything in me, Chris, to not want to do something to this guy, right? Because my street mentality, you know, I tell people I'm a gentleman, right? But I can become a gangster if I have to be. It's still there, right? But I don't want to become an idiot. And what I mean by that is I didn't want to put my hands on this dude. I didn't want to engage in conversation with him. And now a year after that, I see him outside of a house on Fulton Avenue. I'm driving, my mother lived on Cameron, so I'm driving back to my house where I live, and I see him, and he waves me down. And I'm like, what is this dude waving me down for?
Right.
You know, so I pull over, and we have a conversation for about 30 minutes. And, you know, he's out there, he's drug addicted, he's struggling, hungry, no food, nothing. And he's like, man, I want to do an interview for your YouTube channel. I seen you on there, Chad. And I interview the guy who wore a wire on me, and it was my closure. I wasn't as mad as I was the first time I ran into him. And I felt like I was able to forgive this cat. And I interviewed him on the YouTube channel. And he's like, I'm sorry, you know, I'm scared of you. And I'm like, there's no reason to be scared of me.
Well, I know what I'm going to be watching here this afternoon. I hadn't seen that one.
And I tell him, and I pretty much tell him, like, look, what I just told you. You didn't put me in prison. My choices, my irrationally responsible choices put me in prison. That's why I ended up in prison. You just helped facilitate it, but it was me. It's not you.
So was he able to reconcile the fact that the reason that you were here is because you made different choices that were able to resurrect your life and that he could too? Is he just stuck in the mud with this thing?
He's stuck in the mud. He's, still living at his mother's house, who's, I think, very, very sick, I think, with cancer. He's out there stealing what he can steal. He's out there, you know what it is. It's the hustle and bustle of, the everyday addiction. Right. You wake up in the morning, you go out, see what you can steal. You go out there and see what licks you can catch. And then you make a couple dollars, you go get high, and then you're back at square one. Now you're back trying to steal things, doing whatever you're doing in the street.
That's the thing I think that we miss mostly about addiction and street life on whole, is that it's less about the drug than the entire construct of everything else. Your entire life, from the minute you open your eyes to the way you end your day, is built on a certain system that you could become accustomed to. And I see people that many, many years after that life still get drawn back into it at times. It's like you want to go back to your lowest point for your resurrection again every time things get tough. And it's just so baffling. That's why they call it baffling, but it just is. So I guess my question on this, so as you're doing this work and you're making these observations, this is very street level work. And I know that you've talked about some other things that you're working on, but why was YouTube like the platform that you thought would make most sense?
So when I got out of prison, people were hitting me up, hey, I was a jailhouse lawyer in prison. I wrote the first compassionate release motion, which thousands and thousands of people have gotten out of prison on now, right? And I've helped over 100 men and women get out. So when I get out, all these people are hitting me up. They're like, hey, man, you want to do an interview? And I don't know anything about YouTube. I've been in prison almost 20 years, right?
Right.
I don't even know.
Well, that's why I was kind of asking. I mean, you're still rotary dial probably.
Yeah. I don't know how to use it. I mean, they had Sprint flip phones when I went to jail. I don't know how to really use a smartphone. My boys are like, hey, man, what are them phones like? Everyone's fascinated by phones, right? Yeah. I'm like, dude, this is a computer with a phone on it. Yeah. So anyway, long story short, this dude interviews me and I'm like, man, this seems like an all right little platform, because I did have some intentions of getting out and going into schools. I wrote a reentry program in prison. I got a college degree in prison. I taught GED classes in prison, Leaders Breed Leaders, Alternative Violence Project seminars. And I wanted to kind of share my story with people, with kids, right? So after this dude interviews me, I'm like, hey, man, how does this thing really work? And he explains everything to me. And I'm like, I can do that all day long. I taught classes for the last 10 years in prison. I can talk, I can speak, And if we can get a message to people that resonates and young people, then, let me try this out. And I tried it out and it worked out. I mean, I got 126,000 subscribers. Some people have, 1 million subscribers that are doing prison genre content. But, my stuff is real and it's raw. And we do talk about violent stuff on there. I've interviewed former gang members, current gang members, people inside their prison cells, ex-federal judge I interviewed on there, the guy that went to the White House with Kim Kardashian. So we do all that stuff, but sometimes with kids, how you talked about, it's kind of like a different scared straight. It's more of a reality scared straight. These are your options. These are the things that really happen in prison. Right. And I think it does resonate with people because I get emails all the time. And not only with kids, because the mission is to save kids from life imprisonment and premature death in the streets. And we talked a minute ago about the guys on Facebook. These young kids are arguing on Facebook, 18 years old, because he puts up a picture of his girl and a guy puts a laughing emoji. Right. Well, long story short, the dude ends up dead. They meet me at the park. We'll see what's up. They meet at the park. One guy kills the guy. He's dead. And now 2 other kids are going to prison for the rest of their lives. Right. But if they can listen to the stories that we put out there, then maybe it will save somebody. Sure. Maybe you should think that if, this guy puts a laughing emoji, is it really that serious that you want to spend the rest of your life in prison? Let it be a teachable moment. So, that's what I use the platform for. But it was not intended in the beginning. I didn't think that it was going to help people that get out of prison. But numerous people have hit me up that have gotten out of prison like, Chad, I have to watch your show. And when I watch it, it reminds me of where I don't want to be. Instead of putting on my Timbs and going out on the block, I put on my work boots every morning. Right. And I'm going to work today. So it helps, formerly incarcerated people too. So
here's with a challenge that I think that you will have. You probably already have. You've seen this, and I've seen it in a much lesser degree in my journey, as that you start having success and people like to see it. They want to see it. They want to know how you got there, but they don't want to put the work in. I know a lot of people that want the result, but not the work in. So what gets you going every day to keep that cycle going. So for me, early in my recovery, and even any work I've done in the recovery community and outside of my profession, there's a rigor to it every day. It doesn't always feel good. Honestly, it's not a pink cloud thing. You're not like excited about it every single day.
Well, this is the thing, right? Anybody that's been, involved in addiction in their life, and I say that from the point of view where I was addicted to selling drugs. Mm-hmm. I didn't use drugs, but I was addicted to the power that came with it.
I believe that.
I was addicted to the hustle and bustle of each day of, we're about to make this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I did the same thing when I went to prison, like with law work, right? Mm-hmm. Every day I found a motivating factor, which was the government does a lot of bad shit to people. Mm-hmm. I was 24 and sentenced to a 40-year sentence. So there was a motivator there, right? And then getting out of prison, if you're a hustler, you're a hustler. I don't care if you're selling cheeseburgers, hot dogs, drugs, cars, whatever you're doing. If you have that in you, then that's what it is. I wake up every day and my wife says, I don't drink coffee or anything. She's like, I don't know how you do it. I jump up at 5 o'clock in the morning, boom, I'm ready to go. I'm not like, oh man, I got to get up.
It's Irish energy.
Yeah, it might be. So, always been a fighter, always been a hustler, always been, I have a work ethic that's on 100 in prison, outside of prison. So that's what motivates me every day. I got people that I do legal work for. I'm doing a case right now. Before I came here, guy's got life. My motivating factor is this guy's really a nonviolent drug offender and was sentenced to life. Like, I want to win. And I like posting that stuff when I win. Hey, look, we just won another case at Freedom Fighters. This guy had life. Now he gets a second chance to be with his family. So my motivating factor is just that, man, I like doing what I do. I love doing YouTube videos. It's therapeutic for me. I like going out on the street talking to people. Right. I like being involved. If I stay home and I get bored, I guess, I've been diagnosed as a manic depressant once upon a time, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're low, you're really low. But when you're high, you're really high. Right. And I have to stay busy. And if I don't stay busy, then I do start to mope, and I don't watch TV. I don't watch movies. I'm not really into that stuff. So I have to stay busy, and I do. I stay busy. And that's my motivator. So
for you, what that is that if from the way you're phrasing that, we can either be self-loathing and feel bad about our situation, or we could be doing an inventory of our current circumstance. And I feel like you've got some good self-awareness that comes out of it. And I think there's a balance with what you described as you can be depressed easily. If we spend too much time looking at our own circumstance, I had a guy in rehab one time, I'd walk and he could tell by my body language. He'd say, and he knew me maybe 2 days. He's like, Chris, get out of your head. And he said, just go in there long enough to pull the socks up off the floor, put them in the drawers, and get back out. And because I will, if I stay in there too long, I can really mess myself up. But I have to be there long enough to be self-aware, to understand what's going on with me. Am I staying on track? That type of thing. So what you described was, I think, important. I have a question that's a little bit of a departure where we're going, but you did trigger a thought in my head. I was talking to a gentleman in Chicago a couple months ago. No, it's probably more than a couple months ago. It's probably 6 months ago now. He was an older guy. I bumped into him. He was actually my Uber driver. And we casually were talking about the state of Chicago. And his beliefs in it is that the OG was removed from the street with a lot of RICO cases. And so now everybody, the young kids, their guiding light is social media, clout. It's not really even within criminal organizations, there's a construct that says this is bad for business, but a lot of that's been removed. What are your thoughts on that with kids? I mean, and because we were talking about prevention of children, not necessarily the state of crime, but prevention of kids. I mean, what are your thoughts on that when they become the adult in the circumstance?
Well, that's another big issue. Like a lot of kids, I'm going to give you an example. I was in a kid's home when I was a kid, right? Mm-hmm. With this chick, Shauna. Eventually, when I go back to court to get resentenced, I'm in a cell with this kid. And he's like, yeah, man, where you from? And we're talking. And he's like, oh, I was at this place. I was like, oh, I was there before. He's like, oh, my mom was there. And he says his mom's name, her whole name. And then he's like, yeah, she's my co-defendant right now. Well, I remember Shauna. She was pregnant. And it was obviously with this kid. And now the mother became the friend. Together, they're selling crack together, right? The other thing is there's fathers, right? A lot of fathers are in prison. And, not to say it in a bad way, but, some father, you got a baby's mom over here, your girl over here, you got 4 or 5 kids. There's no family structure. There's no example. I mean, when I was growing up, as, cliche as this might sound, what did we used to watch back then? Like Leave It to Beaver and, the Cosby Show. And, that was the family structure. Now you have, like you talked about social media and you got, hip hop wives around there arguing, and this is what people are looking at, right? Yeah. And then when you're growing, and I do believe that people become a product of their environment.
Yep.
So when you're poor, or when your mother's a drug addict and she's selling the food stamps and you got nothing to eat at 12, what are you going to do? What are you going to resort to? I mean, you're going to resort to stealing, robbing, selling drugs, doing whatever you got to do to eat, right? Clothes, shoes, and, like we talked about social media, you don't want to be out there with holes in your shoes. You don't want to be out there with, 2 pairs of pants and 1 shirt and you're going to school. So people start doing things that they shouldn't be doing, but they do them out of necessity a lot of times. Like I talked about, Rochester is stricken with poverty, right? Probably one of the most dangerous cities in the country. And people can look that up and Google that, because I said that on a video and people are like, no, what are you talking about? It is.
Not just New York.
No, not just New York. We also, last year we had one of the highest murder rates, higher than Chicago, per person. I mean, that's what's going on in this community. Right. People are just absolutely, it's just absolutely outrageous. You get these young kids around here, they're telling you with their phone, I'm about to go over here and see my op. I'm about to blow his head off. And they video record it. And now you're going to prison over what? Over a laughing emoji. Right. Over you disrespected me, or
and don't you think some of that is in the hip hop culture right now? I know the Jacksonville scene. They're making, the rivals are making hip hop songs that are wildly successful about what they're going to do, and they actually do it and never really get caught for it. Some of that is setting an example that says, I can do it too. Well, it doesn't work that way. That high risk living again, it's a lot close. This fall is closer than you think it is. Looking back, I was actually talking to Sam this morning, who's going to be on your show. I was describing how I know a lot of stories about a lot of really powerful street guys, like guys that are well respected. They ran huge enterprises. You hear these stories, and you're like, wow, guy was crazy and powerful. And all of them have a prison story because they all got caught somewhere. Well, and some are still in.
You talked about the guy from Chicago, your Uber driver, and he's talking about the OGs. I mean, Larry Hoover, right? Gangster Disciples and all the stuff they got going on over there. But look at Larry Hoover. Not only has he been in prison for the last, 30-something years, but he's been in the hole, the shoe, the box. He's been in solitary confinement all alone in ADX. And I did a story on him. But
I can't even imagine that life. I literally can't imagine that. For me, that would just be, I don't know what it would do to my mind.
This is your life. I mean, if you want to live that life, I used to tell people in jail, like, this is your life. You want to be a drug dealer? Yeah, it's all good when you're out there with the chicks and you're making money, you're driving cars. But this is the other part of it. Right. When guys be in jail crying, man, I got 20 years, man, I got 10 years. Well, this is the part that you don't want to acknowledge. This is the part that you never think about. But part of being a drug dealer, part of being a robber is going to prison. And you will have a prison story. Right. And nowadays it might be a 20 or 30-year prison story or a life prison sentence story. Right.
So that actually is something on your story too. And I might have the facts wrong, so please correct me on this thing. But so you're out there doing your thing. And like you said, the scene is what you're looking for, and you're getting all the clout that you're looking for. And you're committing multiple crimes, and they may be keeping track of those crimes. They're actually building towards your case. If I recall your story, it wasn't yours around multiple charges that had guns involved or something. And wasn't that kind of what ended up by making your case bigger than life? Or was that another situation?
Oh, no, that's what it was. Like, let's say we had a house on Lyle Avenue, 541 Lyle Ave. We had a gun in the house. We also had another house at 445 Lyle Ave, down by Child Street. That had a gun in the house. So what the feds would do is this. They'll let you go. They're building their case, their conspiracy. So when they bust that house, right, you're not in the house, but there's a conspiracy now. There's a gun. That first gun is 5 years. They let you keep going. They bust the second house 2 months later. There's another gun there. Well, now that gun is 25 years on top of whatever you get for the drugs. So you got 5 for the first gun, 25 for the second, and 10 for the drugs. That's what I ended up with, a 40-year prison sentence.
So at the start, before you can even consider anything else, you're locked in with the first 40.
You're locked in with the first 40. That's your mandatory minimum.
And therein lies the problem. Because I think that kids right now are so short-sighted. They think they got away with the last one, so they're good. And they're not realizing that in the current criminal I don't know if it's defense or I guess the current posture.
The criminal justice system.
The system itself is postured in a way to have you hang yourself.
100%. And the same thing goes for robbery. Let's say you walk into a Domino's Pizza, because I used to write about this kid, Azell. What the hell is his last name? I forgot his last name. Jamel Azell, that's his name. He goes in and let's say he robs a pizza store. That's 5 years for that gun. He went in and robbed another one a month later. That's another 25 years. So now he's at 30. And then, he thinks he got away, and then he goes and robs a Burger King. And it's all with the same gun. And now that's another 25 years for that gun. And then another robbery. He ends up with 100 and something years.
Wow.
I mean, eventually he gets out on, You know, the same thing I got out on, compassionate release. But I mean, that's what they do. It could be robbery. It could be anything. And Trump, you know, the First Step Act changed the law where now you're not getting all these stacked sentences where you're getting 5, 25, 25. But they can stack them as 5, 5, 5. They can stack them as 7, 7, 7, 10, 10, 10, 10. You do 5 robberies, you got 50 years just on the gun.
It's still 5 years at a time, you know.
And it's 50, and now you're at 50 years. So
Right.
people, oh, well, they changed the law. Well, they did change the law, but that doesn't mean you get 5 years and that's it. No, you can get 5 years for each time you do a robbery just for the gun alone, on top of whatever you get for the robbery.
Right. And I if you look in the totality of all people that have lived in a criminal lifestyle, the volume of ones that actually, for the totality of their career, walk away with unscathed is almost zero. I mean, you're eventually going to meet some kind of a consequence. It's not the party you're currently sitting in.
You know, the getting arrested and going to prison consequences, the better of the two, because the other consequence is you could end up dead. You could end up shot and paralyzed. Then what do you do?
So that's the part that actually with addicts I try to speak to, is because I think that we think that life and death are the two options with addiction. Being maimed is very much an option to the point you can't use and you're living the rest of your life incapacitated. That also is an option.
Definitely.
Overdose is not, I'm going to die or Narcan's going to bring me back and I'm just going to go use again. There's a huge percentage of people that just are maimed and now you're in homes the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's it. Now you're sitting in a wheelchair watching The Voice
Right.
for the rest of your life.
And the longer, one of the downsides of having something like a Narcan out there, and I don't want to get too far down the drug road, but with a Narcan out there is you can go back and you live to go use another day. I know the argument is that you can live to live another day, but you can live and use another day and make it so the very next use could make it even worse for you as your body is degrading. There's so many implications to that. So I do think that the party that you're currently sitting in right now is probably the best it's going to get. Because literally you could get up tomorrow morning, have your house raided or in the middle of the night raided, and you're done.
Yeah, I mean, look, man, I'm out, right? I've been out almost 3 years. And, you know, I'm just living my best life. I enjoy life. I enjoy my freedom. And sometimes we don't think about, you never really think about losing your freedom until you lose it. Mm-hmm. And then once you lose it, now you're sitting in a prison cell rubbing your head. And, you know, I go back to that video I did yesterday on the Facebook post.
Yep.
This kid was a gangster on Facebook. Yo, I'm ready. I'm about that business. You think he's not sitting in his cell rubbing his head crying right now?
Absolutely.
You think he's not on the phone stressing out where his girl's at? I mean, she's a beautiful girl. Well, she's not going to be around long,
what
buddy.
was your comment? He's too thin to fight or what?
Oh, I said he was too thin to win, too light to fight.
That cracked me up, man.
He's just a little skinny fella. Now he's going to prison with real gangsters.
Yeah, I shouldn't mock that, but I tell you, that was funny because you were like going on this like serious thing and then just slipped that in. It was good. You guys got to watch that video. It was worth it. But to your point, you know, everything, it was all just this posturing. And like you said, his circle of friends, he's a big deal. And now all of a sudden everything falls apart. So you're saying 3 years out, you know, one of the things that seems to me that you can't go from, day one can't be upon release. I'm a firm believer in that. So when I decided to stop getting myself in much less trouble than you got yourself into, it started while I was in my last incarceration, was short incarceration, but I was deciding that at 12:01 on release at 7 o'clock in the morning, I was going to go to my first job. And I fortunately had somebody who would employ me right away. And I had a 90-day plan of recovery and what my first 90 days was going to look like. And I'd already been doing the work before I got out to get ready. Sounds to me like you did a ton of work while you were in there to fill your head with new information and new concepts and new options. Do you think that played a significant role in your willingness to have a new life?
100%. You know, when they talk about rehabilitation, federal prison doesn't rehabilitate people. You have to want that.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing out here, you know, with people that are addicted to drugs. You have to really dig deep and you have to really want it, right?
Yep.
You have to wake up in the morning and say, I don't want to live like this no more. I don't like the way I look in this mirror. I don't like the life that I'm living. I'm worth more than, you know, what I'm doing today. You know, I'm out here selling my body or I'm out here stealing stuff. And, you know, you've been down Lyle Avenue. People got scabs on their face and on their arms. You got to want better. And the same thing in prison. You have to want better. And as you educate yourself, you start to understand that, wow, like I just said, my freedom is important. I am worth more than, you know, what I was worth out there on the street, $2,000 because I'm standing on a corner with a gun in my waist and selling $2,000 worth of crack cocaine in dime bags. Mm-hmm. What kind of life is that? So you do start to...
Not sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, when you start to educate yourself, you start to see reality. You start to see like, wow, life has a lot more to offer. And you know what? Once I got out of prison, I seen that. You know, I went to Bermuda on a cruise. I've never been on a cruise in my life. Yeah. I'm out there on a jet ski. Never been on a jet ski ever in my life. Go to Buffalo Bills games because I love the Bills. And, you know, those are the small things that really matter. And you start to say, man, I like this. I don't ever want to lose this. And my biggest motivator is that, I had remarried my ex-wife, the girl I was married to when I went to prison, ended up with a 40-year sentence. She had to go on with her life. Was she going to wait for me? Right. No, of course not. So she goes on with her life, but we reconnect, we get married, and I got 2 little twin boys. And let me just say that, when you talk about, your rehabilitation, you learn to appreciate. And I got these 2 little guys that I look at every day. They look just like me. And I say, they need me. They can't even talk, but I know. They yell at me like, yeah. I'm like, I got to change their diaper. They need me. They can't do it themselves. I have to be here. Yeah. And they're my motivators, man. I love them. And I'm so grateful that I got out of prison and I have that opportunity, because there were times, Chris, when I was sitting in prison, my heart would start racing. I'm like, damn, man, I'm 38 years old. I'm never getting out of here, man. Right. But when I do, I'll be 64 and I'll never have kids and I'll probably never get married. What am I going to do to survive? My mom will be gone. Perhaps I won't have nowhere to go. Yeah. And I used to think, well, maybe I could work at a law office and just be, writing motions until I die for 10, 15 years.
Man, I tell you, I hated math in school, but math can torment me when you do that math. Yeah. You're looking at life trajectory, mortality, time wasted, time lost, money lost, all of it. I can drive myself completely bananas with that whole math problem.
And eventually, I would get out, but I got out when I was 41. Mm-hmm. And I remember being 38. I remember being 40, my birthday. And I remember specifically remember that day. Like, wow, man, I'm 40 years old. I came in here at 24 and now I'm 40. What am I going to do with my life, man?
Well, I'll tell you this, and I mean, I don't know you that well yet, but I'm thankful that you did. Your story matters because it's striking in an area I didn't know how we would approach this as a society. And we're talking about these kids. We've got kids know everything, they think, these days. And we did too, to a point. But I appreciate you and your story for sure. And that's part of the reason why I said, I'm going to reach out to this guy and see what's up. But, speaking of kids today, like we were pretty stubborn too. Let's get real. I mean, I've joked about your Irish. I'm Scottish Welsh. Stubborn doesn't really go too far away from me. Yeah. What would have worked for you? Like, you had a father who was struggling. He's got this nickname. You're around this environment where the kid's mom probably was working the streets, that you called it Mama Ho, but she probably was working. What would have worked? What would it, I mean, we didn't have YouTube, but what would have actually spoken to you? I mean, for me, I would struggle with that question.
What would have spoken to me is this, right? Where we grew up, the environment, people do become a product of their environment. I didn't really have, the father figure in my life. I ended up having a stepfather, but even he, would hustle and buy and sell stolen goods, selling weed, and the people that you grew up around. I think that a better household, to be honest with you. I love my mom. I love my mom to death. Mm-hmm. My stepfather, I love him to death. But they weren't the best role models, right? They didn't lay down that foundation. And like I said, our city's full of poverty. We grew up poor. Regardless if there was a stepfather in the house, he wasn't doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. So, I think that, I believe that parents mold their kids. Your child becomes a product of who the parent is.
I 100% believe that.
So when your parents
put some pressure on us too, though.
Yeah. And then eventually my stepfather would leave the house and then I thought I was the boss. Mm-hmm. Maybe if my mom put her foot down and, didn't allow me to think that I was the boss of the house, maybe things would have been different.
Sure.
I was always an athlete, never used drugs, amateur fighter, captain of my wrestling team, played baseball. And, I was always involved in that, but I was also poor. And the kid I talk about in my book.
Do you box fighting?
Yeah.
Were you rock box?
St. Martin's.
Okay.
Don Simpkin.
Okay.
Coach Jay.
Coach Don?
Don Simpkin.
Okay.
Yeah. He's an old man now if he's still alive. Yeah. But do you know him?
No, I know the name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Probation officer for like 40 years.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to what I was saying was, when my stepfather left the house, there was a conflict between, when I found out who my real dad was, I'm like, you're not my boss. You're not my dad. Mm-hmm. And eventually, there was physical altercations and my mom kicked him out. I took over, thought I was the boss. Mm-hmm. And we were poor. And now when you're poor, I have a friend that lived down the street behind me. I talk about him in my book, Booper. And Booper's uncle Bobby Burns. I don't know if you know who he is. I don't know. Yeah. Well, he was, drug dealer, drug addict. His mom's a prostitute. His aunt's a prostitute. They live at their grandmother's house, and they just run the show over there. Mm-hmm. He starts selling drugs, and I'm like, man, I want to sell drugs too. I don't want to be poor. Mm-hmm. I want to have some Air Maxes or whatever we had back then, triple fat goose jacket. I don't want to be embarrassed going to school with dirty clothes on. And that was my introduction into selling drugs. So we started selling bags. Back then, you're selling 20s for people, and they're giving you $3 a bag. Every bag you sell, you make $3. You're sitting in a house selling bags. I'm like, After about 2 weeks of that, I'm like, man, I'm not doing this. I'm going to buy my own shit. Even 13, 14 years old, young entrepreneur, wrong business though. But, then I started making money, and now I'm addicted to, trying to, get to who I thought the role models in my neighborhood were, I guess you could say.
So you said something else, and we're nearing close on time here, but, you identified like what your view of it was. And it sounds to me like it would have been helpful to have a mentor that saw that capability in you then. Because one of my questions I was going to ask you are kids too far gone? But really, I think that the question is as adults and mentors to children, are we willing to take the time to see what their potential is, see what their skill set is? Because your skill set sounds like it manifested at 14 years old. The very skill set that you're using today to run your own business, to have a very successful YouTube channel, to raise 2 boys, that's there. So do you think that would have helped to have a mentor that would actually identify it and help you believe in what was there, that possibility for you? Or is it really just about at that point in time, just making sure you could match up with what was going on around you?
I did kind of have a mentor, my wrestling coach, Brian Jacobs. He was kind of like my mentor.
Gotcha.
And you know what? I mean, at the end of the day, he was after school, we'd go to wrestling practice, whatever we're doing. And then he goes home, or on the weekends, once in a while, he'd come pick me and a couple of the wrestlers up and, take us out, video games, whatever. I mean, and talk to us about positive things. But, out of sight, out of mind. When you live in this neighborhood, you eventually become a product of it.
Right.
And it's not an excuse for people like, oh man, there's plenty of people that made it. Well, there's a whole lot more that probably didn't from those neighborhoods. When your mom is a drug addict. Now, my mother wasn't, but, other kids. Your father's a drug addict, which mine was. You're poor. Your mother's a single mother on welfare.
Right.
It is a struggle. This is the reality. And you make the decisions that you feel, you have to make at the time.
I'm not a political guy per se, but I do have some political bias that really irritates me. When I see politicians spend all this time talking about how they're cracking down on fentanyl and cracking down on, stuff coming across the border, and they're calling out China and calling out Mexico and all this other stuff that they call out all the time. And that's generations before they'll fix that problem, while we have kid after kid after kid in the community not even seeing anybody or even having an option. We're investing in all these loftier things that keep people in office, and we're not investing where it happens to be preventable. And that's the kid's decision and the hope and options they see at that point. What we present, not a lot of options to kids in the environment you grew up in.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a lot of options because your options are what's going on in your neighborhood. Even
the boxing programs that are out there, there's a lot of free boxing programs used to be out there for young disadvantaged kids like that. They're all drying up too. They used to travel kids all over the place. Yeah. They're all gone too.
Well, I mean, but you're only there 1 hour a day,
right?
Hour and a half a day,
right? But it's still something, Yeah. And I think that's part of where we get misguided. Everybody has these broad brush fixes for everything. There's no broad brush fix for this. This is a generational thing. That I think that for me in my life, at least, I'm going to speak very personally in my approach to this whole thing. It's about one person and the eye contact you make with that person in front of you. That's the only change I know for sure I can affect. And I might not be able to change their life, but I can plant a seed and an option in front of them.
And you know what? That's what I try to do with the YouTube channel. I try to let you know that there are 2 roads. Mm-hmm. You can choose this one, and it's probably the better one. Or you can choose this one, and these are the consequences that come with the choices that you make.
Right.
So which one do you want to be involved in? Do you think prison's cool? Because I used to think prison was cool when I was growing up. Prison movies, blood in, blood out. Never looked at the reality. But now I show people the reality. I put videos on there where, dude stabbing dude and kills him, and he's dead. And you see a big pool of blood. Mm-hmm. I interviewed Troy Kell, from that Gladiator series where he went to prison as a young kid, and, he's got a life sentence, and he kills someone in jail, and now he's got the death penalty. Mm-hmm. Like, this stuff is, there's someone a little tougher than everybody inside there.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, there's somebody tougher than all of us at some place somewhere. I appreciate you spending time here. So I want to take a few minutes here and just talk about your business. So Freedom Fighters, what are you up to in that whole work?
Okay, so Freedom Fighters is a paralegal and prison consultant firm. When I got out of prison, the probation officer said, look, you got to get a job. I said, look, man, I've been working for 17 cents an hour for the last 17 years. I'm not working for anybody out here. I'm going to start my own business. Right. And then he kind of rolled his eyes like, yeah, okay, buddy, sure you are. Mm-hmm. Well, I said, I'm going to show you better than I can tell you. And within 30 days, I had the business up and running. I do a lot of post-conviction motions, clemency petitions, compassionate release. Like I said earlier, I was the person who wrote the first compassionate release to win. Wrote it for a former mayor and chief of police, as crazy as that sounds. He had like a 25 or 27-year sentence, and I got him out of jail. And since then, the lawyers have made it better.
It wasn't the D.C. mayor, was it?
No, it was Conrado Cantu out of Texas.
Oh, gotcha.
But eventually, I was in prison, so the lawyers, made it better and did what they did. But I told people when I was leaving, I'm going to be the voice of the voiceless. So I do a lot of administrative remedies, like I said, clemency, post-conviction motions. I've got 4 or 5 life sentences overturned for guys that were serving life in prison. Actually, a couple of them that had committed murders. Chazzy Glenn started the G-Shine, one of the originators of the G-Shine Bloods in New York City.
Okay.
Been in prison over 20 years, turned his life around, deserved a second chance, I believe, in my perspective. I had his life sentence reduced to 35 years.
That's an important distinction, too. You're pretty selective on who you represent. You're not representing anybody that has an ability to get out.
Well, I mean, yeah, and, if I think you got a legitimate shot and you're doing the right thing, then yeah. But if you call me and you've been stabbing people in prison and you're selling dope and you've been rode up, no, I'm not helping you.
Right.
Same thing when I was in prison. I would tell dudes like they didn't have money. And in prison, you might charge someone $300 in commissary to do their case, but you're working on it for a month. It's a lot of work.
Right.
But dudes that didn't have money, they would come to me and I'd be like, well, look, man, you got no money. You want me to get you out? What's your case number? Well, when you remember what your case number is, come back and see me because that's the most important thing in your life. And you got to enroll in the GED class and you got to get your GED. I'm teaching it. So you got to come to class.
Right.
And I'll help you for free. And I did that. I've helped numerous people for free. I was on a live last week and I think I held up a picture of this kid where when he finally got his GED, man, he came out there, a big black dude, and he's hugging me and he's crying like, oh, man. So, I mean, and you find some joy in that. Like maybe you help this dude go home and be a father, and that's part of what we did in that Leaders Breed Leaders class that I facilitated. We wanted people to become real men, real fathers, real leaders to stop this vicious cycle of you go to prison, the grandfather goes to prison, then you go to prison, now your son's going to prison.
Right.
Because there's no men in the homes. So, if,
that's the thing, too, is we say that one of the reasons why kids are in trouble is because there is no father figure in the home, but the father figures they have, it's almost better they're not, with some of the stuff that's going on.
Well, no, I understand that, but I think that they need my perspective is they need a positive father figure.
For sure.
So,
absolutely. I agree with you. I appreciate everything you are doing on this. We could probably go on for quite a while here because you got a tremendous story. You really do. What, I guess, in leaving, what would be the one thing that you would pass along to a kid right now that's sitting here and he thinks he's got it all figured out?
I mean, it's cliche because I say this a lot, but I mean it. Know what you're worth. I would teach those classes in prison, and we'd have a lot of young kids from New York City or 17. Believe it or not, federal prison. You got 17-year-olds in there, 19, 18, 20, 21. And I would ask them dudes, and this is, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but you would ask them, what are you worth? And they'd be like, man, I'm worth $1 million. And you're like, you're an adult now, and you're like, man, this kid doesn't even have a clue. I'm worth $1 million. He thinks $1 million is a lot of money. So I'm worth $1 million. I'm worth 10 million. And they would go, well, I'm worth 20. I'm worth 50. I'm worth And then I would tell them, I would say, well, I'm going to tell you what I was worth when I was in the street. I was worth that $2,000 when I had that gun in my waist and I'm standing on Otis and Murray Street on the corner, or I'm over there on Otis and Myrtle, in front of the store back then. And I got $2,000 worth of dope in my pocket. That's what I was worth because I was taking a chance of going to prison or getting killed. And a lot of people were getting killed back then. So back then I was worth $2,000. Today I'm priceless. And I want them to realize that they're priceless, man, that there is no value. You're priceless. So, take a look at yourself in the mirror and just ask yourself, what are you worth? If you think you're worth $2,000 and you're going out there and you're selling dope, or you think, man, someday you're going to, man, within 6 months, I'll have a key and I'm going to flip it if I start out with an 8-ball and you start doing all this math in your head. Really, man, a key, what are you going to do? Make 50 grand in bags? So is that what you're worth? You're only worth $50,000? Know your value, know your worth. Right. Because.
And that's assuming you don't get busted with it.
Yeah, and this is the other part. As you're climbing up to where you think you're going to, because I used to do that, man. I'm going to get an ounce, then I'm going to get a 62, then I'm going to get a big 8, and then I'm going to have a quarter key. And you think this crazy stuff in your head. But as you're, trying to achieve that, if you end up in federal court, they take all that stuff and call it relevant conduct. And now they put it all together and be like, yeah, you did sell 5 keys of crack. And your guidelines are life. Now you're facing life. And really, you made the money and then you spent it and you never made it to the kilo. But when they put it all together, it was about 5 keys and now you got a life sentence.
Right.
So just know your value, know your worth. I know it's not always easy. You come from, a neighborhood where your parents are poor. But man, when you get to that age where you can be going to prison, it's probably time to start making some different choices. Right. If you can sell drugs, you can sell anything. People think selling drugs is easy money. It's not. There were times, Chris, when, I was in a house and I'd be in there 4 or 5 days, man, without a shower, selling bags, trying to achieve this goal. And I look at myself and be like, damn, man, I got to go to my mom's house and take a shower. Or I'm eating Burger King every day or TV dinners. You know, and it's just, that's not the life that you really want, man.
Right. It's glamorized way too much for kids. That's part of it. It's probably a completely different conversation, but I appreciate your new view. I definitely think it's authentic. This is not, and people don't have to trust me. They don't even know me. I mean, your audience doesn't know me at all. But I believe you're real, and I'm thankful you're in our community. I think that we're hurting in Rochester, and we're hurting across the nation right now, and we need some people that aren't going to walk around, hugging it out. We got to be able to have those tough conversations, look people in the eye and say, you do have a choice. I don't care what the 10,000 excuses are you got going on here. It's just some choices are harder than others. You're either going to pay for it now through the grind now, or you're going to pay for it later through the grind later to try to survive after you've made this mess for yourself. Which is it going to be?
I'm going to have to steal that from you, because the grind later is definitely a lot harder than the grind now.
100%. Make it up is real tough. Yeah. So I appreciate that. But, for my audience, I hope you enjoyed the guest today. I really did. This is one of those ones that could just go on and on for me because he's speaking my language. I'm thankful for people like Chad that are out there that are putting their toe on the line for a world that needs people with some experience and some grit and some willingness to speak straight. If you're a young person watching this, make progress with your life today. Don't just sit here with this lofty dream that's chasing something that has a lot of other earmarks of problems for you. Make progress with something that's an authentic dream that can be sustainable, that you could raise children and show them your dream, and that's something that's beneficial for your community. Those are all options for you still. Consider them. These other options are there too. If you feel more comfortable there and you want to play those games, go for it. But the better option and the more productive option for your community is always available to you. Between now and the next time we speak, please keep making progress towards your positive goals, and by all means, stay out of trouble.